The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Evan Imber-Black. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library Program Office, and my guest today is Evan Imber-Black, who is the author of Rituals for Our Times. Evan Imber-Black is a consultant, workshop leader, family therapist, and professor in psychiatry at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. Welcome, Evan.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. You have a wonderful book that's sort of chock full of information, so I hope we can at least get to a little of the better parts of it today. I was thinking this morning that we probably don't think of those hello, how are you, good mornings as rituals, but they really are, and they sort of ease our way through the day. And after reading your fascinating book, I thought about my own life, in which many of the rituals have dropped away since my children are grown and have left home. And I was thinking about saying grace before meals and how that used to be a family tradition in our lives. And now that I'm alone, I suddenly realized I never think of saying grace before meals. Have you heard from other empty nest moms that this happens?
Quite a lot. I think part of what happens is that very often families organize their rituals mostly for the children. We talk in the book about an imbalanced ritual style when the rituals are really for only one generation. And I think when that happens, then indeed when children grow, the rituals sort of fall by the wayside until one day you kind of realize, wait a minute, I'm missing something here, just as you realized with the grace after the meal or before the meal.
What should people do? Should there be a way to reincorporate this in our lives?
I think so, because rituals do give us a sense of ourselves, they give us a sense of meaning in life, and part of what I think we're hoping is that people will think about, if I look at the rituals in my life, who are they for? Are they only for the children? Am I doing them just because my elderly parents want me to? Or is there something in any ritual that I do that also has some felt meaning for me? And that's really what we're hoping people will take a look at.
I was wondering if the fact that the rituals fall away means that they didn't have meaning, and still, for my own part, I sense a sort of emptiness because they're gone, but I feel a little foolish about saying grace before meals all by myself.
It would be interesting to try it and see how it feels, I think. We've certainly talked to a lot of, especially single adults, who at first think, well, rituals mean family rituals, and so if I'm not living in a household with other people, then I don't have rituals. But in fact, quite a lot of single adults that we've talked to just kind of automatically have created some very nice rituals for themselves. We talked to one woman who has a special coffee mug, and she carries it out to the car with herself every morning, and when she comes home at the end of the day, she washes it very carefully and said to us, it's like washing off the cares of the day, so that she has a little symbolic action there every day that's her own daily ritual.
Wonderful, sort of cleaning away the stress.
Right, right.
Wonderful idea. Well, and it may well be that single people or people living alone need the ritual more than perhaps families do.
I think, or equally
as.
so, absolutely. I think as human beings we're ritualizing creatures, and if you look at any culture, there are rituals. So it would be our idea that no matter what kind of household you're living in, that there will be some rituals in your life that can be meaningful.
Were older cultures more ritualistic? Has modern life sort of drained away rituals?
I think what modern life has done is in some ways overwhelmed our rituals, that we live in a very media-driven culture where people have a sense of, here's the right way to do it. I saw it on television, I read it in a magazine, so that more alternative ways of doing things or more subcultural ways of doing things might get marginalized. And again, I think what we're hoping for is that people will look at their rituals and make their own decisions about what is meaningful to them, no matter what the, pretty picture in the magazine might say.
Before we go much further, I think it would be a good idea to talk about the purpose of ritual, and that'll give us sort of an outline to continue our conversation.
Rituals do a number of things for us. If you think about it, they help shape our relationships, they help express our relationships. I think any ritual in your life can be a lens for looking in on your family, your friendships, your community networks, to see the boundaries, who's in, who's out, who's close, who's far apart, what kinds of topics can be expressed, for example, what kinds of emotions. So that whole relationship function of rituals is extremely important. Rituals also help us to heal losses, to heal hurts, to heal relationship breaks, such as a divorce, for example. They also help us to change. I think if you think about the major rituals in life, things like weddings or funerals or birth of children, all of those rituals mark our passages in life from one status to another. They also express our beliefs for us. Rituals tell us what we value and what it is we believe, and even your example of the grace before meal, that little piece is a way of saying, this is an important core belief for me. And finally, rituals help us to celebrate. They help us to celebrate being alive, the joy of living, and the connection, I think, that we have as human beings one to another.
You also talked about the styles of rituals, or the types, I should say, the day-to-day rituals and the life cycle rituals and the family tradition rituals.
Right. I think sometimes when people hear rituals, they think either of the holidays, or they might think of those major life cycle rituals. But also, when you stop and think about it, we have rituals in our lives every day. We have, as you were saying, the rituals of saying goodbye in the morning, or hello when we greet each other again at the end of the day, or meals, or bedtime rituals for children, for example. And then we have all of those rituals that are on what we would call the inside calendar of a family. In other words, things that are occurring in your house that are not occurring all down the block at the same time, like birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, family reunions, and so on. So they're everywhere. Rituals are a resource that you can find in your life really from day to day, and then also at those big seasonal moments as well.
You mentioned an important thing, I think, in your book, that children who come from families where ritual is practiced grow up to be more healthy.
Well, there has been some very interesting research by Steve Wolin and his associates looking particularly at alcoholism in families and looking at those families that are able to maintain meaningful rituals even in the face of alcoholic drinking, in fact have a significantly lower proportion of the multi-generational transmission of alcoholism in the next generation, which leads us to, I think, the important idea that rituals have a protective function in terms of our mental health.
It almost seems to say that we, whether we're adults or children, need a kind of structure in our life, and ritual can be structure too.
It does provide a structure. I think rituals do two very important things for us. They help us with the continuity element of life, staying connected to people who came before us, to our families. They also help us with the change aspect of life. And I think those two are kind of the dynamic balance that we need in our lives of continuity and change.
What importance do you think, we've talked a little bit about ritual in the older areas, the older societies. What importance do rituals have for the cool modern families?
Well, I think a lot of importance, and I think you see it often. What happens in our experience is that for instance, adolescents will go through a period of time sometimes when they're not that keen on the family's rituals. Maybe they don't want to show up, or they want to bring a friend or whatever, and they may even go through a few years as young adults of kind of moving away from the familiar rituals. Then when they start to create their own families, most people start to feel a longing again for making some rituals in their lives, which I think again starts to tell you this is something pretty universal that people long for, want. Generally, when people don't want rituals in their lives, it's because they've had some kind of unhappy or painful experience with rituals in the families that they come from.
Along those lines, I know of a lot of women when they divorce who stop putting up a Christmas tree.
Right.
And in essence, it becomes a painful reminder then to their children that there has been a breakup in the family.
I think that's true, and I think divorce, often the rituals will get interrupted for a while. And I think that's very natural that they would. This happens also sometimes when there's illness in a family, or when there's a death or some kind of traumatic experience. And I think what we would encourage people to do is to think about, what were our rituals like before this experience, before the divorce, let's say? And are there parts of that that we want to resurrect then in the present? It's going to look different. Maybe that woman who's on her own now with her children isn't going to bring in an 8-foot Christmas tree, but she's going to do something. And it becomes then an opportunity to talk with the children about what has changed and what, again, can still be continued in the present.
Or maybe let them bring in the
Right, that's
Christmas
true.
tree,
Exactly.
or
exactly.
have something to along those lines, but give it a change that represents a more positive.
That's right. You know, we
thing.
talked to one woman who it was just too painful for her to try to create Christmas right after a divorce, and so she thought it would be a great idea to take her daughter to Disney World, and they would all forget about it. And then she was sort of bewildered as to why the whole time her little 9-year-old was there, she didn't like Disney World. She was complaining, why aren't we home? I want to have Christmas, and so on. And I think, again, that tells you how these are embedded in our lives, and there is some importance to keeping some of that continuity going.
Is this because children are closer to ritual? I don't know if that's a
Well,
good
children are
phrase.
natural ritual makers. I mean, when you give kids a little bit of a framework for, here's a piece of this ritual, be it Thanksgiving or a birthday or whatever, and what would you like to do with it? In our experience, kids are very creative. They come up with wonderful little pieces of rituals that then you may want to incorporate the following year, or they may want to do something different. Maybe they're going to make a play, or they're going to do something with the placemats, or they're going to do various things that are key to the symbolic aspect of our rituals.
I remember one year making a mistake in our family of 6. I was starting to celebrate the minor holidays, and we had a Lincoln log for Lincoln's birthday, and it had chocolate sprinkles on. And the next year I kind of forgot about that, and I was immediately reminded well in advance by the kids who remembered not only that we had Lincoln log, but it had chocolate sprinkles.
Yeah, see, that's the kind of thing that they do remember it, and they're going to let you know, let's get that log out again, Mom.
So parents beware before you
Right.
start out any new rituals. It may not be just a one-time thing. How can we borrow ritual from the past, which I think is often rich with meaning, and bring it into the future and make it meaningful there?
Part of what we would encourage people to do is to find out about those past rituals. Now, that might mean talking to some of the elder people in your family or people in the community who experience some of those. It might mean doing a little history taking, going back and seeing what was it that people used to do, but especially in your own family. And then thinking through, are there parts of that that would still have meaning for us in the present? Maybe the meaning is going to be different. We talked to one woman who has some very beautiful candlesticks, for instance, that came down from a great-grandmother to a grandmother to a mother to her. And it was only when she started to do a little bit of the research that she found out that these had belonged to her great-grandmother, who as a very young child had to hide from the Nazis, and this was the only thing that the family was able to keep a hold of, and then this has come down the generations. Well, what a powerful symbol to connect her with her own family, with her people, with what people went through, so that when she puts those out every Friday night, that's more than just candles that are burning.
Yes.
That's a real connection.
Almost, we wouldn't be here if
Exactly.
it weren't for this.
Exactly.
Very powerful.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think lots of families have those kinds of things. You just don't realize what they are until you go and do a little of that history searching.
Well, I was thinking too of an example. I went to a wedding recently in which, in the Catholic ceremony, they had a unity candle. There were two candles representing the bride and groom, and then the unity candle. And I was quite appalled when the bride and groom blew out both of their individual candles, you know, after they had lighted the unity candle. And my daughter and I, who was planning her wedding, talked about that, and I said to her, for heaven's sake, don't blow out your individual personalities. And that was sort of a nice conversation for us to have in planning her
That's
wedding.
a wonderful example of the symbols in our rituals and what do they mean. I think very often people don't think through both the symbols and the symbolic action. Many couples, for instance, today have stopped the symbolic action of having the father, quote, give the bride away. And maybe they have both parents walk them down the aisle, or maybe they walk down the aisle by themselves because they don't like that idea of a woman being, quote, given away by her father to her husband, or the tying of shoes onto a bumper. I mean, a lot of people don't know that the origins of that goes back to early English times when the father of the bride would take a shoe and hand it to the groom, who would then hit his wife on the head with it to let her know that now he's boss. So you might want to think twice before tying those shoes on the bumper.
Or 3 times.
Right,
even,
right.
yes.
So those are some of the things, and I think as you looked at that symbol, that wasn't a symbol that made sense for you or for your daughter, and that's what I think is important in our rituals, to think about what symbols do we want to have that express the beliefs that we want to express here.
Well, and some symbols, for instance, Easter eggs, which you mentioned, I remember that we've always dyed Easter eggs in our family, but I don't believe I ever knew the rather rich background of the symbolism of the Easter egg. And it's a wonderful opportunity for families to talk about that in the process of doing it.
Exactly, and to get a sense then of your connection to maybe hundreds or thousands of years of history that way as a human being.
So it's not only our family history we're connecting to, but the whole human history in a sense.
Yep.
You speak in your book about women as ritual makers and this whole issue of how women may feel quite burdened by being the major ritual maker, but on the other hand, men may feel left out.
That's right, yeah.
How can men be brought into ritual making?
That's an important question. I think we've talked to a lot of couples, for instance, who even in their daily life have been able to make some of those adjustments and have gotten to a point of greater equality in sharing, let's say, the preparation for a daily meal or the cleanup or whatever it might be. And then it comes to be holiday time, and it's like the computer kicks in and we're back to doing it the way our own families did it and what we saw. And then if the woman is working outside the home, as most women are, feeling enormously exhausted afterwards and sometimes resentful. At the same time, a lot of the men have said to us, well, you know, I'd like to get in there, but I don't know how or what I'm supposed to do. So some of it is going to take conversation ahead of time. A lot of what I think is a good idea for couples, for instance, is to sit down and talk about what were holiday times or other rituals like in the family you come from, what were they like in the family I come from, what did men do, what did women do, and how do we want to do it now in terms of what kind of values we want to express for ourselves and for our children, particularly if we're reaching towards a little greater gender equality here. The rituals are going to teach us about that by virtue of who does what. So it's a thing I think to pay a lot of attention to.
A lot of what you say in your book is this thoughtfulness in working out ritual, whether that's changing a ritual that is becoming ineffective or meaningless. And I think that's important, an important communication item for couples or for families to look at, that if you're going to change a ritual that has become meaningless, at least give it some thought. And you have some exercises in your book to help people.
There are a lot of exercises in the book so that people can reflect on something before you try to change it. Absolutely. And where did it come from, and what meaning might it have for us now in the present or in the future?
Some of our rituals get so habit forming that we really never think of them anymore. They're just a part of the day that happens and we don't pay any attention. What's the difference between ritual and routine?
Yeah, I think that the distinction that we're trying to draw here, especially with daily rituals, is all of our rituals have to them the aspect of symbols, symbolic action, something that's larger than itself that tells us about who we are to each other. So that a routine, if you think of something like brushing your teeth, usually does not have that, unless your toothbrush is some very important symbol to you. Generally, it doesn't have that aspect to it. So that if you think about a daily ritual, it's special time, whether that's a bedtime ritual, a meal that the family's sitting down together, or something as simple as just coming into the home at the end of the day that might last a minute and a half. It's still some special time out of regular time that I think helps to make it a ritual.
When you talk about it, a ritual for coming home, I remember when I first started to work full time, and my daughter, who was used to having me home, used to come in and want to tell me all about the things that happened at school. And we finally worked, and it was jarring for me. We finally worked out an arrangement where she agreed to give me 15 minutes to have my little transitional time, and then I agreed that we could have whatever time she needed to talk about her
See, you needed
day.
a ritual when you first entered the house, and I think coming back from the outside world is a mini transition. And we've talked to lots and lots of people who created little, I need 10 minutes to do whatever, even if it's just looking at the mail to organize myself, or I need a cup of tea. Then I'm ready to interact and have a different kind of ritual of your daughter telling you the day and that kind of thing. That's a very good example, I think.
It is sort of a rite of passage, probably a more important one than leaving in the morning.
Yes, often, depending on what's going on in the family. Although we talked, for instance, to one father, it was interesting, my co-author Janine had observed daily at her daughter's school a father dropping off a little boy, and the little boy would turn around before going into the school and put his thumb up like this, and his father would put his thumb up like this. And she watched this for a few days, and she went over to the man and asked him, what's that about? It looks like it has some meaning to it. And he said to her, well, my wife and I are separated. I'm staying connected to my little boy by picking him up every morning and taking him to school. We're going through a hard time, and when we do this, it's a way of saying it's going to be all right. We're going to get through this. So that something that takes less than 5 seconds had become a little connecting ritual for them every morning.
If nothing more than just doing the same thing.
Exactly.
A repetition.
Exactly.
As a librarian, I like to think about books as ritual too. The bedtime story time. And those of us who read to children or grandchildren know how many times they want to read that same book over and over again. You talked about a woman who had a very traumatic experience and found that rereading a series of books made her childhood bearable.
Yes, and I think that's a good example of how a book can be that kind of a ritual, especially for somebody who maybe doesn't have those good, warm, human interpersonal connections. The stories can help you think about there is more to life than perhaps what I'm living at this moment. Absolutely.
And they can also provide that connection we talked about earlier with the whole human connection. I was also reflecting on the fact that there are rituals that get interrupted, for instance, when a family quarrels. If a husband was used to kissing his wife goodbye in the morning and they've had a quarrel, he may not kiss her goodbye for a while until reconciliation has taken place. And this acts then as a reminder that something has changed in the family.
You can see what an important signal that is, and we've talked to couples where their own adult bedtime ritual may change due to some stress or something. When you find that happening, that a daily ritual especially is changing, it's interrupted, it's missing, that is a good signal that something needs some attention very often.
The AIDS quilt and the Vietnam Memorial struck me as examples of the healing ritual that you were talking about earlier too. They are new things, certainly very new in our society, and yet they seem to be very powerful, especially the Vietnam War Memorial.
Absolutely.
They seem to be able to bring grief to the surface, perhaps with people who were not able to grieve before.
I think that's true, and when you go to the Vietnam Memorial and you watch people coming there who have lost people, and they go up and they find their person's name, and you see them touching it very lovingly, and then often making rubbings and taking that back home so that they have a piece of it to continue in their life in a symbolic way. And interestingly enough, people have come to call this a pilgrimage, going to the wall, so that it has that ritual aspect. And the same, I think, with the AIDS quilt. What a powerful symbol to think of a quilt, something that has warmth, that has love involved in it, and that can connect you to a whole community of people that are grieving.
And also the idea of the coming and the going in both cases, where there is that.
That's right.
That human connection too. In many lives, holiday rituals have become meaningless, or even worse, they become occasions for family quarrels. And while it may be true of many holidays, I think especially of Christmas, and I suspect it's partly because of the burden of giving and expending money. For us, it's become hard in our family because many of our family members work full-time, and it's just hard for us to find time to do all this shopping. What are your experiences with other people?
Well, I think you're touching on something extremely important. The holiday rituals are like little condensed dramas of our lives. If I say to somebody, remember Christmas when you were 10, they're back there and they can tell me the whole picture of what was going on. Now, in our experience, issues that haven't been dealt with in the family, things that have kind of gone underground, when the family gathers for that holiday time, boy, that stuff is in the air. And that's part of the tension, I think, that people feel. It's both exciting on the one hand, but it's also a little scary sometimes. And that is right there. Lots of issues with the holidays. They become very commercialized, obviously. People feel the kind of pressure that you're talking about with gift giving and so forth. As well, we've found that if people have experienced a loss in the prior year or maybe few years, the holidays are often a time where that loss gets focused in a way because everyone around you is celebrating. You don't really feel like celebrating very much. In our experience, if people can stay open to having some talks with each other, especially before the holiday, about what that loss has meant and telling some of the stories about the person and so forth, then the holiday itself stays more open and more available to get into, enjoy, find some kind of meaning in.
Which brings us back, I think, to the most important message of the book, is the thoughtfulness and the planning ahead for ritual. And there's so much more. So before you have your next holiday meal, please read Rituals for Our Times. Thank you, Evan. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.